Good afternoon, everybody. We're just waiting a couple minutes for everybody to join from the waiting room. All right, and as everybody slowly gets their sound working and their videos on as they would like to, I'll start us off. So thank you everybody for joining us, especially over the lunch hour here. I'm Lindsay Bart. Sorry about that. I'm Lindsay Barton, the Senior Communications Partner supporting University Services and Finance, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator this afternoon. So before we formally begin, I'd like to start today with a land acknowledgement. The university acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. So with that, good afternoon, Treaty 6. And today is an opportunity to provide an update on the design of the new university budget model. Transparency is quite a key principle behind the model. So discussions like today is one of the ways that we can stay connected and hear your input throughout the whole process. The budget model will guide the allocation of operating resources across the colleges, faculties, and university-wide services in order to deliver on our mission and achieve our strategic goals. So the discussion today will be led by Dr. Verna Yu, Interim Provost and Vice President Academic, and Todd Gilchrist, Vice President, University Services and Finance. We'll start with a short presentation and then we'll get right into your questions. Thank you to those who submitted in advance. Related to that, maybe before we begin, just a few logistical reminders. Please keep your microphone muted during the presentation if you're joining us on Zoom. And if you're comfortable, please feel free to turn your camera on. We love to see your faces in a town hall setting like this. And we'll take questions at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to raise your virtual hand. You can do that by looking at the bottom of your screen and clicking the reaction with the little smiley face there at the bar, and then raise your hand. Also, if you prefer, you can add your questions to the chat or submit via email, which will be shared across the slides that we present today. And with that, I will turn it over to Verna. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Lindsay. And we do have a bit of a slideshow. So we'll go to slide 2, please. So in the agenda today, we're going to provide you with an introduction to the university budget model, along with a bit of history. We'll go through what a budget model is and why we need one. And we'll share the principles that are guiding the budget model development and our approach to designing the model with budget owners from across the university. I'm going to share some of the priorities and recommendations that have been gathered with budget owners and how they will be used to develop the model. And finally, we will take questions and open the floor to hear your thoughts. So as Lindsay had said, some of the questions have already been submitted, so thank you very much. If you do have questions that are not addressed today, please submit them to budget@ualberta.ca, and responses will be provided via our website. So I'm going to hand over to Todd, who's going to provide some context on what the university budget model is.
Excellent. Thanks, Verna. Good morning, afternoon, I guess, by 6 minutes. Good afternoon, everybody. As Verna says, I'm just going to spend a little bit first. We'll talk about why we're designing a new budget model and just make sure that we're all using a common definition of what a budget model is. So the budget model guides how much operating budget each area gets to operate across the university. The model doesn't affect how much revenue the university collects. It only guides how we distribute the revenue that we have. Budget model is co-created to ensure that resource allocation aligns to the budget principles and incentivizes behavior within the appropriate behaviors within the faculties or the units. And it considers the university's mission and goals as well as the specifics within each faculty or unit. The budgeting process, on the other hand, so not the model, but the process, is the annual process that we go through to predict how much revenue we'll likely need to have in the years ahead, and apply the model to predict how much will be allocated to each faculty and unit then based on that model. Faculty deans and unit leaders then prepare their budget plans that outline how they intend to spend that allocated budget within their unit, portfolio, or faculty. Now, within a given faculty, the budget model does not describe how money flows to academic departments or schools, or how it's spent by the faculty department or schools. The internal allocation of funds is at the discretion of the faculty dean and their team. Go to the next slide. So here you see a picture of a pie chart showing the structure of our consolidated budget. So we receive funding for operations from a range of different sources, but not all of the money that we receive can be used freely, as it were. Some of the funding is restricted, and by that, what I'm suggesting is that it's set aside for specific purposes like research or capital projects. You see a couple of the different wedges up there. And that means that money has to be spent in specific ways. Revenue from government grants, tuition and fees, and other revenues such as investment earnings contribute to what we call the operating budget, which you see there is the biggest slice of pie. The operating budget is used to pay for the majority of what we would know to be our expenses, including faculty, staff, salaries, student support, libraries, supplies, materials, equipment, building, operating costs, utilities, the list goes on. The two largest sources of revenue that can contribute to that big slice of pie are tuition fees and the provincial government grant. So that's specifically the operating program and support grant. Like other universities, the University of Alberta also has those other pieces of pie that you see in the picture. So things like an ancillary budget, which accounts for services such as parking, student residence, dining services. All of those are self-funding. They have to cover their own expenses. We have a research budget that consists of grant awards, research contracts, and other specific research contributions. Capital budget, which is for our major capital work and our deferred maintenance projects. We have what's called a special purposes budget, which is primarily related to the FOMD faculty and specifically to academic medicine and health services program, or the AMHSP program as it's known, grant. There's also the physician education and development, or the PED grant, as well as some annual endowment spending allocations from non-research related endowments. And these other four budgets are all restricted. The resources are allocated within these funds to specific purposes, and as such don't make up part of that operating budget. The university budget model guides how we allocate that operating budget, and you'll see there that it's about 58% of our total consolidated budget. Now, these allocations occur across two main groups, faculties and university-wide services. University-wide services might sound like a new term to you, so just give you a bit of background here. It includes units such as libraries, student services, IT, HR, facilities and operations. You've heard these referred to in the past as central services or just central in the past, and we're revising our terminology here to better reflect the new operating model, and that all of our activity, regardless of where it resides in the university, is in the interest of advancing our core missions of teaching, research, and community engagement. 40% of those university-wide service units consists of libraries and facilities and operations. So that just gives you a sense that those are 40% right off the top is clearly directed towards delivery of teaching and research core missions. Next slide, please. We'll just take a bit of a tour back in time here, a bit of history. Historically, the university allocated its operating budget to faculties and university-wide services based on historical budgets. And that's what is typically referred to as incremental budgeting. And so essentially all the organizational units receive their budget from the previous year, and you would see some incremental adjustments that might be required to reflect overall changes in operating income and expenditures, different pressures that we might be feeling in the organization. And the historical budgets were based on an accumulation of past decisions. They were not connected to the current level of activity within the institution. And this resulted in some significant financial pressures for some areas of the university, and less so for others. So knowing this, the university has decided to explore options for a new model, what we call Budget Model 2.0, and Budget Model 1.0 at the time. And we had conducted 3 years of research and extensive engagement to explore what alternative budget allocation approaches existed. And these efforts came together and formed an activity-based budget model, which was implemented in fiscal year 2020-2021. And so that model is, again, what we now affectionately refer to as Budget Model 1.0. And that work followed our some other peer universities, such as University of Toronto, UBC, Queen's, USask, Simon Fraser, McMaster. They were all universities who at the time had moved away from incremental budgeting to activity-based budget models. At the U of A, the model was implemented for 1 year only. And that was largely a result of the, after that fiscal year 2020-21, the provincial grant, as we all know, was cut rather quickly and rather dramatically, and we needed to implement across the board cuts to our base operating budgets across the entire university, all faculties, all portfolios, all units. And then over the next 2 years, we had to adjust to those cuts. And to do so, we implemented 2 consecutive years of, again, incremental budgeting with a focus that was really across the board on operating budget reductions. And then in fiscal 23-24, which is the fiscal year that we've just entered as of April 1st, we carried forward the base operating grants from fiscal 23 with some very minor adjustments to the mechanics of the model. And so you could consider that now to be our now 3rd year of incremental budget model. All the while that we've been working on this last year of incremental, we've also been looking forward, and we've commenced a project to develop a revised budget model that builds off the good work from Budget Model 1.0 to be used as we move forward into fiscal year 24-25, which is next fiscal year. So that fiscal year starts in April of 2024. What's critical to understand about each of these models is that they all require a choice, right? So regardless of the model that we employ, each faculty and unit needs to make strategic choices about how we spend our finite resources. Remember, the model just allocates what we have. It doesn't increase the amount of money that we have. And after the last few years, our budgets are very tight. Go to the next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about why do we need to change it, just on my comment of how tight we are. Now, historically, the provincial government grant accounted for about half of our total revenues. You can see that in the bar graph here. The previous budget model, again, 1.0, was designed in that context. And in response to COVID-19 and the provincial government budget cuts, what has been referred to in some circles as the perfect storm, we had to respond to that. Part of that response was to establish goals to grow and to diversify our revenues, which is a good thing. And as we look forward, we need to further focus on diversifying our revenues and grow as an organization, because provincial government grant is predicted to stay lower. This isn't just a trend that we're seeing in Alberta, it's a trend across the country and in other global jurisdictions as well. So this means that we need to think differently about how we allocate our resources so that they best support our core mission and help help grow the university and increase our revenue. We'll go to the next slide, please. So under budget model, let's talk a little bit about why we need a new model. So under budget model 1.0, university-wide services were funded entirely through that provincial grant, the operating program and support grant. And with the grant now reduced by 34%, that's what we've seen over the last few years, $222 million. So with that now reduced and our new operating model, which has transitioned much of the university services now that were previously occurring in the faculties into those university-wide service units, the funding model that budget model 1.0 had just is no longer possible. The fundamentals of it don't work any longer. All across the university, all faculties, departments, and units have had their budgets reduced. However, university-wide services did grow, and hopefully that makes sense. We had to reduce the overall size of the organization. We took resources that existed in the faculties and different portfolios, and we moved them into these new university-wide service providers, and that had to then scale back up. Everybody had to reduce, including those university-wide services, and then some of them were scaled back up to provide the services back to the broader university. And so, some examples that you can think about are, our IT supports HR, finance, communications, work in the VP RI research administration area. The model also leaves portfolio, the old model also leaves portfolios and academic units overly exposed to funding shocks. And that's what we've seen in the last 3 years. And budget model 2.0 is intended to limit that. Budget model 1.0 limits our capacity for long-term planning. We really get stuck in this year-on-year changes from our government grants, and it doesn't allow us to look forward. It doesn't secure sufficient funding for strategic initiatives, university-wide strategic initiatives, which will be critical to achieving our goals overall. And it doesn't create the right incentives with respect to enrollment growth and research growth within the organization. So to adapt to our new revenue cost structure and to achieve our goals and ambitions, we need to revise the model. And I'm going to turn it back to Verna here to introduce some of the principles that we've been working to as we do this work.
All right, thanks very much, Todd, for that. So based on these goals, there's a series of budget model principles that are going to be used to guide the development of the new model, as well as commitments and expectations for its use once implemented. So there's more information on each of these principles available on the budget model 2.0 web pages. And for those of you on Zoom, our moderator is also going to post their descriptors in the chat. Ultimately, these principles ensure that we consider everyone who uses the budget model and is impacted by the budget model and its design. So the next slide goes into design of the new budget model and the process that involves. So we invited budget owners from every faculty and portfolio at the university to be part of 5 expert working groups. The groups have been providing input on the threshold budget model design decisions relating to the 5 themes. So the 5 themes you can imagine, as you can see here, is about how we share tuition revenues, how do we allocate funds to university-wide services, how do we support research activity and growth, how we support strategic initiatives, and how we allocate budget using multi-year data and tie allocations to performance. These expert groups included about 85 budget owners and users, as I mentioned, with representation from all parts of campus and university-wide service units. So what have we heard? Since January, we've hosted multiple sessions with each of the expert working groups, plus 3 information sharing sessions to share knowledge and discussion across the groups. And across these 19 meetings, we've received valuable feedback, guidance, and a set of recommendations to inform the development of the model. Those who participated provided very candid feedback on the things that matter the most, and possible unintended consequences that we need to mitigate against. The expert groups have finalized recommendations, which were shared in a final information sharing session that we just had a few hours ago. So here we're going to summarize some of the key recommendations emerging from the groups. So the recommendations include support to have budget allocations based on activity, which includes teaching research service rather than historic costs. Support to tie a small share of operating funding to performance, with metrics to be established collaboratively. And while the groups did not provide recommendations on how to allocate the provincial grant for teaching and research, they did support allocating it in a way that recognizes differences in cost structures and research performance. Support to continue sharing tuition, as we introduced in 2023-24 between faculties and university-wide services. Support to establish more stable funding sources for strategic initiatives and research growth, with a preference for these to be combined into one university fund. A space allocation approach that will incentivize units to meet space usage targets and optimize space usage. Support to use 5 years of data on teaching and research activity to smooth allocations over time. And support for university-wide services to produce multi-year functional plans that articulate service delivery priorities and investment needs. Additionally, we heard that there is going to be need for iteration and evaluation of the model into the future, recognizing that we will not be able to anticipate all possible consequences of the new model. So over back to you, Todd. I think you're on mute, Todd.
It's only been 3.5 years. You think I'd have that figured out? So where are we going with this? What's next in the process here? So with the approval of our guiding principles and the thoughtful recommendations from and hard work that each of the expert working groups has done on the major budget model design choices, we now have a fair bit of work to do, and it's time that we move into the design of the model phase. So over the next few months, the budget model design group, with representation from resource planning and the Office of the Provost, working very closely with Verna and myself, will be designing, testing, retesting, running scenarios of the new budget model. And they'll run it through these scenarios to understand the impacts on individual faculties and units, to identify gaps that the model may have, and anticipate and mitigate any challenges that could cause or be caused as we move through the implementation. We aim to have a draft model back out for some consultation by the end of June, which will move through approvals late June and into July. The team will then spend a couple of months preparing for implementation, which includes planning how to best move from where we're at currently into the new model, and to support all budget owners in its implementation. Again, as I mentioned, for the fiscal 25 budget cycle. That budget cycle kicks off in October of this year. So October 2024, that's when we start planning for the coming year. Sorry, October 2023 is when we start planning for fiscal 25. So during this period, we will explore how best to move to the new model and any transitional supports that might be needed to provide more time for faculties to adjust their activities and spending to adjust to the new model. And of course, we remain committed to communicating to our community, to you, throughout this process, and you'll have significant lead time training and support on any changes in your area. So I'm going to turn it back to Lindsay just to close up the presentation portion before we move to Q&A.
Wonderful. Thanks, Todd. So yes, this is the opportunity to ask questions. When we first hosted this town hall at the end of March, we had a really, really wonderful and thoughtful discussion. So that's why we're doing this again. So again, please feel free to raise your hands using the reaction button at the bottom, post away in the chat. I'll be paying attention to that. And while you're thinking of some wonderful questions to ask, we did get a few in advance. So I'll start with one of those. A couple questions came in related to this. So where will the new budget model change where our budget comes from? And will it, significantly change the amount we're allocated? I know you touched on that in the slide, but maybe Todd, you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, for sure. So where does it come from? Well, we have a variety of revenue streams, including tuition fees, government grants. Those are the two biggest one: investment income, research grants, sales, donations, and endowments is what makes up sort of the bulk of things. As I mentioned, not all of that money that we receive can be used freely. Some of our funding is restricted funding, and as I said, that is to say that it's set aside for specific purposes. I'll emphasize this point again, that the budget model itself has no influence over how these restricted funds are allocated. The operating budget is the unrestricted funds, and that's what's used to pay for, again, the things I already listed, but you can think of things like salaries, benefits, materials, supplies, utilities, etc. The primary sources of revenue for the operating budget are tuition and the operating support grant. And over time, of course, we hope to increase our revenue sources through things like increased enrollment and other revenue streams to decrease our reliance on the operating support grant and on government funding overall.
Thanks, Todd. The next question we got is, will this new budget model limit how we spend our budget? And I believe this is related to a great conversation we had around choice. Verna, did you want to take this one?
Well, we give you the budget to the faculties, and the faculties obviously allocate out to the departments or the units within the faculties. Where there's going to be a little bit of difference is that now with the college dean, vice provost position, they're going to be very central to the allocation of the budgets. There are going to be deliverables. Obviously, we're in the process of working on our university strategic plan, and that's going to drive priorities and where we see strategic priorities that we may want to put more emphasis on. But absolutely what we're wanting to make sure is that the core missions, and remember, one of our principles is the issue of around the priority of academic needs are first and foremost in any budget model, and that our core mission is that of teaching and research. So we need to make sure that we have our core mission in place and that that's well supported. And then anything in addition to that is going to be obviously driven both as a combination of strategic priorities based on the UCP as well as strategic priorities that are more at the local level.
Wonderful. Thanks, Verna. Anything to add on that one, Todd?
No, I don't think so. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So we have a question hot off the press in the email inbox. So it reads, as central units strive to enhance performance and reduce costs, how do processes get put in place in a manner that de-incentivize central units from gaining performance by passing workload and administrative overburden to the faculties and ultimately individual professors? So there's a lot there. Let me know if you need me to reread it.
No, I think I have the gist of it. I'll try to answer, and Verna or others from the team may want to chime in. So, I think the first thing that I'll emphasize is, we have gone through a tremendous change in the last few years across the university, and as I believe I spoke about earlier, that required that all areas of the organization reduce in size. We moved a few hundred more people around into the new university-wide service units, and we're working to provide now that service back to the entire organization. So I mentioned that for a couple of reasons. First, to acknowledge that we still are in a period of transformation. What we had to do and the speed at which we had to do it is kind of unheard of, and so it takes time to make these things sustainable, and that's another presentation, but we do have work underway on that right now. And so you can watch for some more information on that. But as it relates to the budget model specifically, the university-wide service units will develop what are called functional service plans. They'll be done kind of on a 5-year rotation is what is planned. And in these plans, it will take a look at what those units are going to be doing, what the budget impacts are, what the goals are, what the efficiencies are that they will look to achieve, and it will include a component of looking at the service, the level of service that's currently being provided. So that's the mechanism back to those university-wide service groups to, I'll say, provide for a level of accountability back to those groups to provide the services that they're there to provide.
That's great, Todd. Thank you. And any weigh-in from any of our expert group co-chairs on that one? I wasn't sure because there's a lot there. Okay, great. And I'm not seeing anything coming in through the chat. So perhaps I'll just pose a question that we had from our previous town hall that I thought was a timely one. And with that, we might wrap if there's no additional questions over the lunch hour. So the question was surrounding security and safety. So are you factoring in the ever-growing safety and security issues on campus into your plans and increasing the operating budget for University of Alberta Protective Services in proportion?
Yeah, so I can. I'm happy to take a shot at that one to start. So. So first of all, I just want to emphasize the importance of safety and security in the organization, and hopefully people are seeing the change that our culture of care initiative is driving, which is focused on improvement and creating a culture that supports physical safety, psychological safety, and cultural safety across the organization. Our UAPS team is doing yeoman's work as it relates to providing for the security part of safety on our campuses, and just want to acknowledge the good work that they're doing. So again, the budget model takes a look at directing dollars where the activity is. And UAPS exists within F&O, and so F&O will be developing a functional plan that I mentioned earlier, and would anticipate that the needs for UAPS and other aspects of F&O will be addressed within those functional plans.
Andrew is here. Andrew, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, thanks, Todd, for that. I just add that the Campus Safety and Security Working Group, co-chaired by Jason Carey and James Allen, is looking at a number of initiatives. We also have an external audit of what we've been doing in our UAP structure to make some recommendations. Sadly, like all big cities in North America, Edmonton is challenged at the moment with some issues. We're working with the Downtown Recovery Coalition and the Ministerial Task Force to see what can be done. We welcome the addition of resources, and the impact of our community action team with a member of the Mustard Seed is having positive effects. And we're also looking, as we come to the end of the semester, building access and reducing hours where we can. Obviously, being an open campus comes with some challenges, but lots going on, and we'll continue to communicate to our community.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And Andrew is one of the chairs of our expert working group. So thanks for all of your work as well, Andrew. And just a reminder in the chat, if you do want to send an email or a message to me directly anonymously, you certainly can. And we have one that's come in. So wondering if there are any concrete steps being taken through the budget model 2.0 process to address the feeling of have versus have not faculties on campus. And Todd or Verna, I'll let you decide who wants to take that one.
I think Verna wants to take that.
Gee, thanks, Todd. No, but absolutely. I mean, when we think about strategic initiatives and the subvention fund, that is actually one of our strategies, multiple strategies, but one of our strategies to make sure that we recognize that there are going to be certain programs, departments, faculties who may struggle and who've struggled in the past and continue to struggle, but are really important programs for the university to continue to invest in. And so the subvention aspect of the Strategic Initiatives Fund is a very important part of that. It's a very important mitigating strategy for us as we launch Budget Model 2.0. As we said, we don't know what all the unintended consequences are going to be, but we anticipate that there will be some, and so it's very important to have some mitigations in place. But at the end of the day, I think that one of the big advantages of a Budget Model 2.0 and why we really want to ensure that there's that transparency and understanding what it does is that you are going to be able to make decisions, informed decisions about how, if you are going to be wanting to increase revenue, or if you're wanting to build programs, that you're going to be doing with an understanding that if you are going to do that, you're going to have conversations, obviously with your team members, within your faculties, but you're also going to be able to do it in a way that incents the types of growth that you might want, that we would want. So for example, if there's international enrollment growth that you want to move forward on, these are the financial pieces that you have to be aware of, and then you make an informed decision, obviously in the context with the leadership within the teams that you're a part of. But part of it is that, activity-based budgeting is to be able to put out there for you sort of the framework by which you can make decisions. Because right now, kind of people are making decisions all over the place without understanding the true impact. And then it actually makes those silos of haves and have-nots even worse. And so this is about leveraging or actually evening out the playing field, in my perspective, so that, as I said, you can actually just make informed decisions.
Well put. Thank you. Thank you, Verna. And another question that's come through: with a possible move to more activity-based budgeting, concerns about the possibilities around cost recovery by various areas. Is this being discussed as part of the design? Was this discussed as part of the expert groups?
Not sure. I might need a little bit more on that question, Lindsay. If whoever asked it can just provide a specific area of interest on the cost recovery piece.
Yeah, perhaps if we can frame it within a specific area or something. I'm not following either. And perhaps I'll take this time as they think through that question to say thank you for all the questions today. These questions and those asked on our March 29th town hall will be added to our website and used in future considerations around our design. So thank you.
So just with respect to the question around cost recovery, so that's one for me. I know that, for example, the ancillary departments charge fees for the use of certain services. And I'm wondering if the conversation has gone to an area where, for example, IST might start charging for the provision of certain types of services, or even HR or finance, depending on, because if we're looking at the true costs of the activities, then there's often potentially a tendency to go, well, this is value added, so we're going to start charging for this, as compared to simply providing that service. So I'm just wondering if that has been discussed.
I think what you're describing, Francois, and thanks for the question and thanks for the clarification, sort of that true charge for a specific service, that really is a responsibility-centered management budget model, an RCM model in its very truest sense. And there are not many, if any, universities that are using that to that degree. So the short answer is no, not for the services that you spoke about. But it will be factored in the context of the amount of activity that is required, and we measure ourselves, both to ourselves as well as to some externals, to understand what we need internally to meet those service needs.
Thank you.
Great.
Now, sorry, I'll just add the ancillary operations, the true ancillaries, they do have to cover their own costs. So yes, there are direct charges.
So just maybe a bit of a follow-up. So I'm a little concerned. I'm part of an academic medicine and health services program department. And there have been kind of some inklings / conversations about the possibilities, for example, of HRPs and finance partners and other individuals who provide services to AMHSP departments to have portions of their time charged back to the AMHSP. So that's a much more specific item, but that's a little bit disconcerting to me.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any specific conversations in that regard, Francois, but Bernie, you might have more information.
Yeah, and I would say, Francois, that's because AMHSP is another source of revenue. That's an external source of revenue. And so I'm not privy to those discussions, but I'm just trying to think about why that could be coming up. And it could be related to the fact that because it is another restricted grant, there could be some potential overhead costs that we're not charging the AMHSP per se, and that might be something that, you know, the faculty is considering.
Thanks.
That could very well be, because the university-wide services provide services not just to those that are quote unquote operating under the operating program and support grant, but we provide services to the entirety of the university.
Thanks, everybody. And with that, I believe we are at the end of our questions. So thank you to everybody that's submitted, and I will turn it over to Verna to close today's town hall.
Perfect. I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming today, and especially want to thank all the expert working group members. As I said, there are 85 of them, and many of them are here today to help support the team. We really aspire to arrive at a model to the greatest extent possible that balances all the priorities and needs to achieve our ambitions going forward. And we also want to provide, as I said, a level of transparency so that all decisions that are being made can be made fully informed. And as I said, we're going to revisit the model to reflect on this alignment to the principles, likely in about 3 years' time, to fully ensure that the effects have been demonstrated and continually improve the model as we learn. There's also going to be some iterative improvements along the way. And right now the design team is working on some scenarios for the expert working group. So with that, just want to say thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. I hope you have some time to eat. And thank you so much to everybody and to everybody who's been supporting this work.